We've been talking about solving one variable, one-step equations. So today we're going to talk about multiplying and dividing. We've been working on addition, subtraction. So our goal is still the same when we are doing multiplying and dividing equations, right? So to get that variable alone and positive, just like we wrote on the front of our notes, right? So, and remember, there's always that invisible 1 in front of our variable. So here we have 20 equals 4z. So again, we're doing that inverse operation, right? Remember, inverse means opposite. So if we're going to think about the opposite of multiply, divide, right? If we are multiplying by 4, the inverse is to divide by 4. And remember, we write division as a fraction. So if we are multiplying by 4, we're going to divide by 4, which means we're going to make 4 our denominator. If we divide by 4 on one side, we have to divide by 4 on the other. 4 divided by 4 is 1, so technically we have that z alone and positive. And 20 divided by 4 is 5. So our solution is 5, because if I did 4 times 5, I would get 20, which makes my equation true. So let's check out number 2. Now this is a negative 8 times g. So again, we're multiplying. So the inverse is to divide. Now since we're multiplying by negative 8, we have to divide by a negative 8, because a negative divided by a negative is a positive 1g. If we left this, if we made this a positive 8, then we would have a negative divided by a positive, and this would be a negative g, which is, again, not what we want based on our definition, right? We want it alone and positive. So we're going to make sure that that is going to be a negative 8. Because when we do inverse, that's just operation, not signs. So a negative divided by a positive, a negative 8 divided by a positive 24, or 24 divided by negative 8, I said it backwards, I apologize, is a negative 3. And again, when we plug that in, a negative 8 times a negative 3, negative times a negative is a positive 24, which is what we wanted. Let's try one more. 30 equals negative 6 times e. So again, we're multiplying, so the inverse is to divide. We're going to multiply by a negative 6, so the inverse is to divide by that negative 6. Again, remember, a negative divided by a negative is that positive that we want, positive alone variable. And a 30 divided by negative 6 is a negative 5. So tonight, I'm going to ask that you try number 4 and number 5. Now, on number 5, you're going to have to write your equation and solve it. Let's look at the next part of our notes, and let's look at division and talk about how that is the same but slightly different than what we were just talking about with the multiplying. So this says x over 4. Remember that fraction mark means divide. So x divided by 4 equals 7. Well, how do we undo, or the inverse division, is to multiply. So if I'm dividing by 4, then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to multiply by 4. You could put over 1 if you wanted, not necessary. Because when we look at this, then we have fractions, right? Multiplying fractions, top times top, bottom times bottom. Well, look what happens. 4 over 4 is that positive 1x. So if I multiplied by 4 over here, 7 times 4 is 28. Let me make my 2 look a little bit better there. Okay, because if I put 28 in place of x, if I said 28 over 4, that is 7. So it makes my equation true. Let's try number 7. M divided by a negative 6 is a positive 6. Okay, so again, we're dividing by a negative. So that means we need to multiply still by that negative 6. If you remember when we talked about cross-reducing, we can cross-reduce this. A negative 6 divided by a negative 6 is a positive 1m, and a positive 6 times a negative 6 is a negative 36. So if you do not remember your integer rules, you're going to have to make sure you remember that. We can check it. A negative divided by a negative is a positive 6, which is what we wanted. Number 8, negative 12 is equal to r divided by 2. So again, we're dividing. So the inverse is to multiply. We're going to multiply by 2 since that's what we're dividing by. And we can say 2 divided by 2 is 1, so we have r. And 2 times a negative 12 is a negative 24. So those are our notes. I would like you to try number 9 and 10 in addition to numbers 4 and 5 on multiplying. And we're going to talk about that in class tomorrow.